I call the next item of business the debate on motion 22004 in the name of Christina McKelvey on showing solidarity with anti-racism. I invite those members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now, and I call on the Minister to speak to and move the motion. Minister, 13 minutes.
We have an overall vision for race equality in Scotland that by 2030 Scotland is a place where people are healthier, happier and treated with respect, and where opportunities, wealth and, more importantly, power are spread more equally.
Institutional racism and structural inequality exist in Scotland, and we need to recognise it, highlight it and commit to address it on a continuing basis.
Engaging in empty gesturing about racism ends up being performative and a quiet way to continue systematic racism.
It had so many tools to address othering behaviours that we all have, unconscious bias, for young children, for older children.
Most of us will be familiar with Angela Davis's words. In a racist society, it's not enough to be non-racist, we must be anti-racist. Well, I would question whether even that is enough.
I'm angry that in 2020 we're still dealing with overt racism, with subtle racism, with institutional racism, with structural racism. Whichever form it takes, it is still racism.
It's the concept of institutional racism. That racism isn't just something that is perpetrated by people, it is perpetrated by organisations through their practice, through their culture.
That will involve difficult conversations, listening, acting, and in some cases, just being quiet and stepping aside to let the voices that we find so easy to ignore speak their truth.
It's time for white people to change their behaviour, to say what they're going to change, rather than continually confronting black people. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that's been left reflecting on how best that we can show solidarity with those fighting against this injustice, and how we can use what they term as our white privilege to help.
Well, that's not terribly encouraging, is it? It really makes it sound like the Scottish Parliament is being controlled by social justice warriors.
So let us all act together. Black lives matter.
Our history and our national wealth are steeped in the blood of the slave trade. That rage felt by protesters towards the public memorialisation of slave trader Edward Colston in Bristol might just as easily have been felt here in Edinburgh towards Henry Dundas.
As I said, this is going to take over everything, and at the moment it's taking over Scotland.
I don't think we can pull down every statue, or change every street name, or tear down every town hall or townhouse that philanthropy built, brick by brick, from the proceeds of trade and exploitation, whether it was tea or tobacco, or spices, or slaves.
The fact that a third of Jamaican plantations were owned by Scots, that the wealth accumulated through the 18th and 19th century surrounds us all. The Georgian grandeur to which we all associate a degree of pride, whether it's in the new town in Edinburgh or the West End in Glasgow, should really be a mark of shame.
That's what we do in Scotland. We face our gritty and dark past in the same way we face darkness today. Whether it's Edinburgh's new town or the mansions that litter the Clyde, these are physical embodiments of the Scottish Enlightenment, but they also serve as reminders of the grotesque history of the wealth on which they were built.
It's right that our children learn that for almost 100 years, one-third of colonial governors were Scottish, that Scotland sent disproportionately large numbers to fight British colonial wars.
But what's the point of emphasising that Scottish history is really just evil, and any of the good stuff is actually tainted because of the evil that also existed at the time? Why would you do this? Well, the answer is, of course, because you want to emphasise that Scotland now is a bad country. And that means that Scottish people living now are bad people. And you know what kind of people they are, don't you? That's right, they're racists.
That our privilege is at the expense of the rights and opportunities denied to others because we live in an unequal and unfair society.
But anyone watching in horror from 4,000 miles away and thinking that Scotland is not racist, anyone thinking that our institutions and structures, that our Scottish society is fair and equal, would be wrong.
Was the systemic institutional racism, the racism born of privilege and unconscious bias, that hurt them the most.
Some of those structural inequalities that are built into Scotland today.
Because it is critical that people understand the legacy of slavery, the legacy of racism that surrounds us all, the wealth that it accumulated, and how that has perpetuated inequality and injustice in society, and Scotland in particular, today.
But speaking of the people of Scotland, what exactly is the solution? The final solution to the racism question? From the social justice warriors running the Scottish Parliament, what is it that they want to see done? Who are we going to be pointing the finger at as the guilty party for having done all of this cruelty, malevolence and injustice to people of colour?
The most senior positions in Scotland are filled almost exclusively by those who are white. Take my portfolio alone. The Lord President, white. The Lord Justice Clerk, white. Every High Court judge, white. The Lord Advocate, white. The Solicitor General, white. The Chief Constable, white. Every Deputy Chief Constable, white. Every Assistant Chief Constable, white. The Head of the Law Society, white. The Head of the Faculty of Advocates, white. Every Prison Governor, white. And not just Justice. The Chief Medical Officer, white. The Chief Nursing Officer, white. The Chief Veterinary Officer, white. The Chief Social Work Advisor, white. Almost every trade union in this country headed by people who are white. In the Scottish Government, every Director General is white. Every chair of every public body is white.
I'm starting to think this guy just really doesn't like white people. The way he's saying white, and he's not the only one who did this.
Every chief executive of every council and every government department, white. Every director of a department in Scotland, white. Every principal of a college or university in Scotland, white. Every head teacher in Scotland, white. Every chair of a public sector body in Scotland, white. Every High Court judge in Scotland, white. Every prison governor in Scotland, white. Every editor of a news organisation in Scotland, white. Why?
The answer is, of course, because Scotland is 98% white. It is 2% non-white, and of that, 1% is black. That's why there is a massive lack of apparent representation in the Scottish Parliament, because it is almost entirely white people in Scotland. There is just a dearth of non-white people to recruit into the ranks and push up the echelons.
Is it because we don't have the talent? Is it because we don't have the ability? Or is it because that the opportunity doesn't exist? Or worse yet, is it because people don't think they're wanted or they're not welcome?
You've got Scots everywhere running Scotland. It's almost like it's almost entirely Scottish. What is going on here? It must be racism. But okay, it can't be that bad. There are some Conservatives in the Scottish Parliament. They must have something to say, something that counteracts this ridiculous narrative of Scotland being essentially a slave state.
Presiding Officer, let's be clear. Racism pervades our society, and it is a learned behaviour. People are not born racist. It is absorbed from the society in which we live.
I'd like to thank the Minister for bringing forward this debate today and agree wholeheartedly with the motion before us. I would hope we all share the deep concern and horror so many feel about continued racial injustice across the world, and that we all stand in solidarity with those calling for change. That we all recognise at this time of global pandemic that we must be cognizant of public health issues, and that we recognise too the responsibility on all of us to identify and dismantle the barriers of structural racism which still exist in our society. I don't have that lived experience, so I would rather listen to those who do and to their suggestions for what next, what practical and, if necessary, legislative changes will make things better, rather than charge in here in all my whiteness with some 10-point plan. Like I say, I haven't got the lived experience of black and ethnic minority Scots who've experienced prejudice, hate and discrimination, and I will listen and be led by those who do in what practical changes can be enacted to move us forward.
That is everything given to the social justice narrative about Scotland. Everything they could ask for. Scotland is racist, it's institutionally racist, it's full of racist people, it's irredeemable. They're not even going to take leadership. They're going to listen to whoever it is that they're listening to who will tell them what to do. So there you go, folks. It looks like Scotland has been completely conquered by the social justice warriors. And now Scotland just seems to have no alternative to social justice. The Conservatives are doing it, the SNP are doing it, Labour are doing it, the Lib Dems are doing it, assuming they even exist in that country anymore. It's all social justice in Scottish politics from here on out. Scotland is bad, Scottish history is bad. The Scots are probably uniquely evil in some way. They'll be found to be so because they require them to be so. But it'll be all bad. Everything's tainted and they'll be coming for you. And of course, because my channel has been demonetised, I have to let you know that we have a Spreadshirt store, and I think the Diversity is Strength t-shirts are the most appropriate now, because even in a country where it's only 2% diverse, it's still our strength. I'll see you in the next video.